Abelino!
For that.
Ready for some full stack engineering?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I guess where we left off last time, it's time to go JBOD shopping.
Let's go. No.
Cool. So I guess to start with, this is the server I've got, the NAS, and wonder if the top view or a profile view is better. We'll go with that one. Oops. Here we go. So we got a couple card slots to work with. So we got to add, I guess, to back up and restate the problem again. So there's 12 bays in the NAS itself, which I've maxed them out at this point. So to add another one of the SSDs, I got to shuffle some drives over to the JBOD, which is the same form factor of this, but it's just got another 12 bays below it. There's one controller card in it, and it's up here right now, and it's basically driving all of those drives. It's connected to the backplane for all those. There's a couple other PCI slots in this. So there's one on the other side of this riser. There's one that you can kind of see right here on this side of the riser, and those are 8x PCI slots. And then there's two on the other side over here that are 16s. One on the top is populated with a card that does, it's a breakout to NVMe drives. So that slot is chewed up doing that. But I do have one other 16x slot open down here. And if I remember right, I think these are full height slots for the cards here. I think the only half height one is this 8x slot here. So hopefully maybe the best place is to put the card in over here. And if that doesn't work, I could at least put the little external, I can't even think of what you call it now, but the thing that gets the cabling out of the case, because that's not on the controller card itself. Ideally, I'd probably just put it like right below there, right below the card itself. But if I have to put the card in one of the internal mounted slots over here, then I could just run the cables internally here to the little breakout card that gets them out the back of the case. Then from there, it's getting them into the JBOD. But I just checked the JBOD here, and luckily the JBODs are already wired and ready to go. So it's already got a card in here to accept the SAS connections.
That's right, because the HBA card that you bought has the internal ports, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And I guess like one thing I could do is this backplane has for the drives here has the ability to daisy chain. I think it's got the outputs on this side, so the connection comes in over here from the controller that's already in the system, and I could run it just daisy chained off the backplane out to that little external card here and pass that straight through to the JBOD. What I'm concerned about with that is I've got 2 ports on the card right now, and if I remember right, that's essentially got the capacity for 8 drives or something like that, or I guess essentially 12 gigabits per second per channel. Is that how it works? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Yes.
And for a total of 4 channels per port, physical port, the card has 2 ports, so I've got 8 channels, 12 gigabits each total. So if I were to daisy chain off this backplane, what I'm concerned about, especially when it comes to the SSD drives that have higher bandwidth, is I don't want to have the SSDs be basically be starved of bandwidth when there's access to the other just spinning disk array going on, or the backup, if there's something going to the backup drive or something like that. Like if the main array is doing a backup, for example, I still want the SSDs to be able to perform, okay, and give them a dedicated channel. So that's why I was thinking maybe that extra HBA card might be the way to go here, and just have dedicated channels to the SSDs and then anything that's a spinning disk gets its own separate controller for that stuff. So that being said, what parts am I going to need to do this? You've already hooked this up before with your JBOD. It looks like I'm missing a couple things. And where do you say we start on this problem?
So it sounds like you already have an HBA card, host bus adapter with internal ports.
Yep.
The low-hanging fruit is to find the other PCI card to take in the internal ports and make them available via to the external, just external. I don't remember what that adapter is called, but we can find it. Yeah,
and I think I maybe remember seeing one in the Supermicro manual or somewhere. So we can take a look for that as well. And then since this is external, I'm going to need some external SAS cables as well, right, to be able to connect these two units together.
Yes. And I'll look for, I know I bought mine from UnixSurplus. So I'll see if I can dig up that SKU and we can get that rolling.
Cool. So I guess one of the places to start with, if we hop back on eBay here, is an LSI controller card. I assume I should go with LSI because there's already one in the system. In fact, this was the actual listing for the system I've got, and if I just go down here and look, let's see, there's the backplane storage controller. Should I just buy another one of the same card, or is there something else you'd recommend?
Let's think for that. I want to see what that is.
Oh, those are really affordable.
Yeah, that's a 3008. That's the 9300 series, actually. But it's a Supermicro branded card, which is fine. Yeah, that's definitely a very good price.
Are there any disadvantages to that? So, for example, I mean, like I happen to have the Supermicro server, so it'll work for that. But like, is it vendor locked to only work in Supermicro machines, or is it like crippled in some way that the LSI controller isn't? LSI being a brand of HBA controllers.
Yeah.
Like,
so
what are?
That's a very good question, and maybe. Sometimes there is firmware that locks these HBA cards to only work with specific hardware, vendor-specific hardware. However, there is the ability to flash them with a global, if you will, variant of the firmware, which will allow you to use that card in any piece of hardware, essentially. But since we are dealing with Supermicro hardware to begin with, this is fine. I can also look up, you could actually just do an eBay search for LSI 9300-8i.
What's that again? 30088i?
9300-8i. No, 8 at the yeah.
Oops. That works.
I think it's that one. Yeah.
This one here.
Yeah, but that's also Supermicro one.
Yeah.
There's a variant that shouldn't. If we go back to like search results.
And so real quick, so like the same part number came up before Supermicro. And so what's going on here? Does this essentially mean it's Supermicro's version or like their like licensed version of an LSI controller? Or because it's kind of got this in parentheses? Or is this just some part number that came up because it's like kind of compatible or similar to this, but it's not this?
Yeah, half and half. The 9300 is the part number for the HBA cards that LSI has like in their official website. The 3008, and I know I mentioned it earlier before we even landed on this page, is actually the SKU of the die of the actual chip on the board. So that's how Supermicro came to that SKU number. And L8I, 8I meaning there's 2 ports, and I being internal. There's the E variants where the ports are external and they're actually on the plate of the card.
Okay,
Yeah.
so crazy question. Actually, point of clarification first. So 8 meaning 2 port, and you derive that from having, and basically these 2 things being the ports.
Mhm.
That being, you get 4 channels per port, so that's really like a channel count, and then you just divide by 4, and that gives you the number of physical ports on the card.
Correct.
Next question about the I is, since I need to get to external ports anyway, should I be searching for the E version?
Yeah, I was going to touch on that next. But I thought you already had this card. So I thought we were just going to reuse something that you already had.
No,
but since
I only
you don't
have
have
one.
it.
Yeah, I only have the one that's already powering the current backplate.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, since we are going to go external, that's our application here. Then yes, going with the E variant is just easier.
Okay, well, that makes my life a whole lot easier. It looks like this one has a better picture. Let's go with that. Because this is essentially what I need, and I thought I was going to need to do this in a separate add-on card and chew up another card slot, and also have to buy cables then to loop the internal connectors out to that breakout card. So this is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like if I needed to, if they've got a better picture of this, maybe this will have to work. This is the full height card bracket here, it looks like, and then they've got the half height here. So if I needed to, I could put it in either of those slots that I have. So yeah, that's nice.
And I remember I bought one of these used. It looks like this one might be new. And it only came with the half height bracket, and I actually needed to buy, or no, I think it came with a full height bracket, but I wanted the half size one. And so I needed to search eBay to find the half height. I think it took me a few weeks to actually eventually find one that some user eventually wanted to sell. But yeah, I eventually got the one that I needed. One word of caution here. These cards have been known to be easily counterfeit. So let's look for a seller that we know is a good seller. And 250 seems a little bit steep for a 9300 card.
I mean, Tech Dude sounds like a pretty reputable name here, so I think we can trust this guy. Yeah, so I did click on that one because it looks like it had the best picture here for illustration. But let's
Gotcha.
Yeah, let's take a look. So if 250 sounds high for this, oh, this is also open box. So it looks like it is brand new, but maybe like has been returned from somebody, but it's not a used card. So like a new item that somebody got, realized they didn't want, or it didn't work in their system or something like that. So it got returned, but this hasn't been sitting in somebody's machine for like 4 years.
Right.
So that's probably why it's a little higher. Sounds like maybe it's a little more trustworthy because of that. wow, like the pre-owned one is only $50 less. So I guess this being said, like, because you know the market on this better than I do, what type of price range are you looking at for a card like this? Or like what do you consider to be a reasonable price?
So a decent one that is used, I would pay maybe like 100, 110. And that's the 93 series. Like 9400 series, I would probably be looking at $200 for those cards.
And what's the difference between the 93 and the 9400 series?
So latest gen, which I think was either last year or the year before, it's been a while since I looked at HBA cards, was 9500 series. I typically will only buy 2-gen old equipment. So I'm comfortable going as back. I'm comfortable with purchasing something as old as like a 9300 card. Anything older than that, I probably won't buy because I'm sure I could get something at a decent price that is newer. And I have in the past. Like for example, I've bought I think I have a 9400 series card that I bought at 200. And a few 93s that I probably bought at around $100.
Gotcha. And so I noticed like a lot of these just on the screen here are a lot higher than what you're thinking. Does any of that
shortage or?
Yeah, I was going to say, so there is obviously, we are in the middle of the chip shortage right now, so that might be driving prices up. Is there any price difference between internal and external ports? Because looking over at like this one, for example, that's down at $125 for internal ports. I've
noticed that internal seems to be cheaper than external. I don't understand why, but I've definitely seen that in the past also, even before the chip shortage happened.
Gotcha. And so how did you end up breaking out your ports to get to your JBOD? Did you actually go with a separate controller, or did you just use a pass-through and like daisy chain it from like the backplane you've got?
I did external card.
Okay. And so you were down then at a lower price for an external card.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So maybe Tech Dude is ripping me off here.
150 in today's market doesn't sound too bad, actually.
Okay.
But from China, we don't want that. Okay, we don't want anything shipping out of China.
And for anyone who's not thinking about that, why don't we want to get one that's shipping from China?
The likelihood that the card is counterfeit is much higher. And while you might have the equipment to test if it's counterfeit or not, because you do have a lot of the electrical equipment, I don't. And I just don't want to take those chances. More work for me. I'd rather buy it from a reputable source such as UnixSurplus or what's that other? It's that YouTube channel that also has an eBay store.
Oh, Art of Server?
Yes, the Art of Server.
I actually just bought some rack screws from that guy the other day, and I get hashtag not sponsored, but yeah, he sent a nice follow-up email and all that other kind of stuff, and I really wasn't expecting that from a YouTuber. So
if you want to
experience from him.
And if you want to go a little bit more in depth on like the like how common it is that these cards are counterfeit, I think he has a good video on that, and he lays a few down on the table and starts to like go through like signs to detect counterfeits. So anyone in the audience that wants more information on that can look him up on YouTube. Yes, on YouTube.
Cool. And so just for our context here, like the counterfeit cards look cheap, not necessarily knowing that this is one or not, but knowing that they are cheaper in general. Like, what are the consequences of getting one of those counterfeit cards?
I don't recall, but probably not going to work.
And is it something that like I could just flash the firmware on and it's going to work, or like what kind of tools would I need to do that, or
I wouldn't even know if it's as easy as trying to flash the card with correct firmware to try to get it up and running. It could possibly well be that it has a legit LSI HBA controller on the card, but it could also mean that reliability of the card itself is much, much lower.
Gotcha. So like it might have the right controller, but they've got some other substandard components. Let's say like bad caps, maybe, because that's a common failure. So like if they've cheaped out there, and so like, yes, you might have the good controller chip still, but your card's overall lifetime when it's dealing with the heat that's in a server and stuff like that might actually put a lot more stress on some of those subpart components that they cut costs on.
Could be, yeah. Yeah, at this point, this is all very much speculation. I've never actually purchased or had the luxury of purchasing a counterfeit card. I did have some troubles with one card in the past, but it was just because some individual flashed it with the wrong firmware, and I ended up getting a partial refund because of that. But that's a story we could go in another day.
Sure. And so I guess like moral of the story is, worst case scenario, if you end up with a counterfeit card, it could end up not working in the machine at all.
That, or it works and it'll fail like 90 days later outside of eBay warranty, and you're screwed out of $200. Ooh, those are great. The Dell LSI cards.
Gotcha. And so like when I hear of Dell, like I think of them locking down a lot of their hardware, especially like if I remember right, like processors and stuff. I thought they were starting to vendor lock those. So what makes the Dell so good for HBA cards?
The heatsink is way bigger.
Oh, that's a massive heat. It's on both sides. Wow. So not only do you have more surface area for the heatsink on the top, let me just compare that since we're looking at them. So that's the heatsink on the Supermicro version. And then on the Dell, that's like twice as much.
Yeah.
Area right there.
Yeah.
And there's this big old like heat spreader or whatever this is on the back too. Okay.
And these chips get toasty, so it's definitely good to have more surface area. I actually have a variant of this, but I think it's the 9400 series that I got in the Dell variant. And I tested it out and it worked. So I didn't have issues with vendor lock with the Dell HBA card.
Gotcha. So I'm actually adding that one to the watch list right now because I'll say for my budget, I'm not opposed at all to paying $200 for a good quality card. So this looks
also, like right now we're looking at the 9300 series, but we might want to look at the 9400-8E series and see if they're around the same price range. If they are, might as well go 9400 series from the get-go. Yep,
that sounds like a great plan.
And now you're just one gen behind, essentially. Oh, yeah, they're pretty pricier.
They're not too bad. So like this one looks similar to the Dell card that we just saw. I'm seeing this one supports PCI 3.1. Oh, here we go. That's a really interesting distinction right there with the NVMe. So what's going on here with what this is able to support with the NVMe that I'm guessing the other one probably does not support, if I've got that right?
So let me bring up the spec for the 9400 chip. If I remember correctly, it does support some amount of NVMEs. Like if it's connected to a backplane that has NVMEs, it'll be able to support a handful of them, but not a whole lot. The 9500 series, that's where that number of NVMe support like went up by a lot. and that's around the time where you saw data centers starting to head into the NVMe direction a lot heavier. Let me get those numbers for you.
Sure. And while you're doing that, I guess one of the things here too, I'm assuming like most of our viewers probably know what an NVMe drive is, but for anyone who doesn't, they're basically those small drives that are kind of like a little stick that you plug into a little slot. So it's not like the 2.5-inch like SSD drive or the bigger like spinning disk. But that being said, so just to go over this, like if I don't have a controller that explicitly supports NVMe drives, I can't just go with one of those converters that converts NVMe into like the SAS backplane in the NAS. Like that won't work without the controller supporting it explicitly, right?
Sorry, can you repeat that
again? Yeah, so like I can't use NVMe drives at all in my NAS unless I have a controller that explicitly supports those, right? Like I can't just use like one of the converter bays to get it to SAS.
Right.
So the controller card actually needs to speak the language of the NVMe drive.
Yeah, because if you do get like a converter card, your base bandwidth is going to be whatever your backplane supports. So you won't be able to utilize the NVMe's full speeds there. I remember looking, I think I found it. I remember looking at some of this stuff maybe like 2 years ago when I was doing initial research on JBODs. Like it probably was 3 years ago. It just brings back memories.
Good memories or ones that you tried really hard to repress?
Good memories.
Good,
good,
yes,
like,
okay.
Like a kid sifting through toys at Toys R Us or something.
All right.
Okay. So the maximum device per controller, that's interesting. I thought for SAS and SATA, I thought it was higher. But for the 9400 series, wait a second, this is Mega RAID. Mega RAID is not, I think this is not a host bus adapter variant.
Yeah, so are you looking at this bit? Because the part up here that says RAID card caught my eye.
This one's good though. Like they just think it's a RAID card. But if it actually is a 9400 series card, then it's an HBA card.
Okay, that's good to know. So just as a little background, like we're both running ZFS. So what's the and so we're talking about like things like RAID Z1, RAID Z2, where ZFS has its own like type of RAID built into it as a storage platform. So what does that mean when the controller card here says RAID, and how does that fit into what ZFS is doing?
So you'll find, and that's where the confusion usually happens. Like you'll see these cards in eBay and think, oh, it's going to be a hardware RAID, but it's not. There's a big distinction between hardware RAID and software RAID. What we're talking about today here is under the scope of hardware, software RAID, and we want to shy away from hardware RAID. Hardware RAID is where all the RAID magic occurs in hardware on the actual card. So if this was our hardware RAID card, all the magic around parity calculations and all that stuff would occur on this card. And that means that the processing of all that is probably going to be much faster on the hardware itself versus software RAID. I kind of dispute that nowadays, but I'll digress.
Well, no, that's a good. That actually sounds like a good point, though. Like, so if it might be faster for hardware RAID, why don't we want to do hardware RAID?
it's more dangerous, in my opinion, especially for home labbing, because it means that if your hardware RAID card goes down and you don't have a backup of the exact same card, then you probably can't get your array up and running quickly. That means you have to go out and buy the same card, or I'm 99% sure that it has to be the same card, or the same variant at least. If you don't have one laying around to replace it, then you won't be able to get your RAID array up. And that just means more downtime. With software RAID.
And just to clarify there, so that means number one, in this type of system that we're putting together here, that we're buying for these basically like just used equipment to build a home lab, we've essentially got a used controller card in there at the end of the day. And because this is used, and because it's a home lab and we're probably going to run it for way longer than they run this equipment in data centers, this card's already going to have a certain amount of stress on it already when we bought it, certain amount of wear or like lifespan that it's already gone through. And our drives then, if we RAID those drives together for resiliency, so we can, if we lose one drive, or depending on the RAID configuration, if we lose a drive or two, we haven't lost all our data, and we can hot swap a new drive in to keep that array going. The layout and the configuration and the way that disk array works in a hardware RAID system is linked and kind of stored in this controller on this physical card. So if the card dies, we've lost the configuration for how our disks are set up. And so that means even though you might have data on the disks, if you've lost the configuration, you can't get the data off of the disks without having the same exact configuration set up. And therefore, the only way to do that is to buy another model of the exact same card that's failed, put that in the system and reconfigure it the same way that you had it before, and then it should be able to read your disk array again. Was that right?
Yes, that's my understanding. And that's where the risk lies. And I actually have a Broadcom RAID card somewhere on a shelf, but I actually never used it for that same reason, because like when I bought that card, it was maybe like 1,000 something and change. And I couldn't return it. And two, I thought, well, if it dies, and I bought it used also. It was that expensive in the used market. So if it dies and I can't get that card, that same model of the card, then my RAID array is screwed. I would have lost all the data until I, dish out to buy the same card new, probably. So de-risking, that means going the software RAID route.
Gotcha. And so that means all of that configuration lives in ZFS, which is the software part of that file system. And that ZFS configuration is essentially saved on one of my disk drives that's probably not in the array, number one, like a dedicated operating system drive or a mirror of dedicated operating system drives. Which also gives me the ability to back up that configuration to some standard file format that if that system goes down, I can recover it based off of that file, rather than having to go in and do some kind of system configuration on like a hardware controller, like in the BIOS or something like that, essentially, right?
Yes, and I think with ZFS, it's much easier than that. With mdadm software RAID, that was definitely true. I think you just needed a one-liner with a hash file somewhere, hash string somewhere that you needed to add to your mounting file system file in Linux, so that mdadm knows how to mount it. If I remember correctly, my memory can I might be wrong there, but with CFS, I think it's easier. I think it's just a matter of telling CFS, like let's say you grab all your disks, just remove them from your host system, and you set up CFS in another system, and you just tell in on that host, you just tell CFS, hey, mount this array with all these drives. CFS can figure out how to properly mount your storage pool just by knowing, just by you giving it all the drives, all the devices on that new system, and that probably just means that the config is just split in parity across some of those VDEVs. Haven't dove into the technical details though, so I could be very well spreading misinformation right now.
So that no, that's fine. This show is just all about our opinions, and we probably don't say any facts on here, right? So knowing that, like, that sounds a lot easier from a recovery perspective too. Of like what happens. Like a lot of these servers, for example, yes, they come with a lot of redundancies. You've got multiple drives, like I'm doing. I'm going to have 2 controller cards in this system. So if one controller dies, I could always pull the cables on one and pass it through that backplane, even though I said I didn't want to do that. If I needed to do it in a disaster recovery situation, like I could, and it could keep the system up and running. But if you hit a certain number of failures in your entire NAS, your entire box goes down. It sounds like one of those advantages then of using a file system like ZFS is you could actually pull those drives and move them to either a replacement NAS, or potentially if your desktop supports, if your controller is still good and you're able to pull your controller and put it in a different box, you could theoretically rig your drives up to one of those other boxes, load your ZFS config on there, and you can still get the data off those drives if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I can attest to that I have had to go through before that you were speaking to is I did move. So like I'm running TrueNAS, which is running ZFS under the hood, and then it's basically got a dashboard and some other nice administrative functions on top of it. I did actually switch my operating system drive out. So it was running on one of the drive bays. We'll just go to that picture real quick. So I was running it off of one of these drives to start with, but then I actually wanted to use that bay as storage rather than burn a bay just for the operating system. So I found a little drive that plugs into one of the internal SATA ports here. If I remember right, I think they call it a SuperDOM, and it's just a little flash drive that plugs right in there. And I put that in, and I did a clean format on the system. Like I didn't even try to copy data from one drive to the other. I just saved the TrueNAS configuration file off, reloaded TrueNAS over on the other drive, restored the configuration onto it, and my system came back up. It just found everything on the system again. So that was incredibly convenient to be able to do that.
Yeah. And for those in the audience that currently have a RAID software setup using mdadm, the same also applies. When I was transferring data from my old RAID array using mdadm, I Frankensteined a system together because I didn't want to bring down my huge workstation to where the rack was to do the transfer. So I just Frankensteined a small system together that had enough SATA ports on the motherboard, stacked all the hard drives. I know that's terrible. Stacked all the hard drives, connected them all to the SATA ports on the motherboard in the open, not in the chassis or anything like that, and brought up the RAID array on Linux using mdadm, and it was able to just bring it up on a brand new system. I think it was blank Debian host that I just quickly installed just to do the transfer from the old RAID array to CFS. And that worked. It took a few days to do a full transfer, but yeah, that's also applicable. So getting back to the topic, the 9300 series card, the one we were looking at prior to 94, does not have, it doesn't seem like that has support for NVMe's. 9400 series cards, that's when the support for NVMe's were introduced. So these cards can support up to 1,024 SAS SATA devices via backplanes, not directly via split out cables. I think via split out cables, you can do 4 per port.
Yeah, and I think we've got an example. So like, here is one of the examples of those breakout cables. And what is this cable doing essentially?
It's splitting out a mini SAS HD port into 4 SATA dedicated cables. So like with this card, you'll only be able to, if you do it that way with the split out cables, you'll be able to connect up to 8 drives directly to this HBA card.
And so I could run this in something like a desktop, assuming the operating system supports it. So like Linux probably does. If I remember my Windows versions correctly, I think Windows 10 does not out of the box, but if you buy their workstation edition or something like that, it lets you put an HBA card in. So essentially, if you had one of those computers that didn't have a backplane, and the backplane being this part here that all the drives and drive bays plug into, it's hard to see it in this picture, but it's kind of that. Yeah, it's even worse to see it in this picture, but it's that card in the top that all the drives plug into. If you don't have that, they do have these SAS to SATA breakout cables, and the protocol between SAS and SATA, at least going from SAS to SATA, is compatible. You can't go backwards from a SATA controller to a SAS drive, but it works the other direction. You could plug this in then to, say, like drives in your desktop, or like your case, you could plug this card into a desktop machine and like use these cables to pull the drives out of your NAS that's failed. And you could recover them in a desktop or something like that using this. Cool. So that being said, I think, so I personally really like the thought of being able to support NVMe drives. And I say that because right now I just upgraded to the SATA drives, and based on the benchmarks we did in the last episode, I noticed like we're basically going to cap fast SSDs out at about 500 megabytes per second. SATA being 6 gigabits per second, like they might have another 100 megabytes headroom, but like we're not going to get much more performance out of them than we're getting right now, compared to NVMe's, which could be 4 times that or more. I think the NVMe in my workstation here was it 2,500 megabits per second, something per second, or 3,000. I can't remember, but I'll say it's at least 4 times better than that SSD was that we benchmarked last time. And so knowing that in the back of my mind, there's going to be a point where I might actually want to throw NVMe's in at some point. And that day might actually come when I get the virtualization server going in there, because that might be a better use case for something like that. But I could see that on the horizon, and at least for me, spending another $100 on the controller card right now is well worth not having to mess around with that part later. I would rather just, I have the buy once, cry once philosophy. I don't mind spending a little bit more now if it actually does what I want it to do later down the road, and I don't have to mess with it anymore. Especially since tearing apart servers, and especially tearing apart your NAS, and mine being, like we talked about the other day, like it pretty much runs my home office at this point, and like all my stuff is on there. I don't want to be pulling it apart, like on a weekly basis or anything like that. Like my goal is to not have to get inside and touch it as much as possible. So the NVMe support sounds like a really nice thing from what I'm thinking. I'm seeing some challenges though, maybe with the external part. And if we remember from last time, let me actually just pull up the document we were looking at last time here. So we were essentially looking at this of what the configuration was going to be. And inside the NAS itself, I'm probably going to throw those SSDs directly into the NAS and then use the JBOD in any other storage. I have like 4 more rack units down here that I can expand out into another JBOD, which will probably come once I fill this up. But I'd like to have, I think, all of the spinning disks outside of the NAS so that if I ever had to like shut this JBOD down or something like that, I have a battery backup in the NAS in this rack, so that might be a really good example. So like if this goes on the battery, I might want to shut down the spinning disks while still trying to keep the NAS itself up because my workstation's on a backup too. So then until the power comes back on, I've got enough time, like it can just keep running I've got basically like an hour of runtime on that rack over there. And I think 30 minutes maybe on this one here, depends on how much stuff is running. But we'll say 20 to 30 minutes. I might want to be able to shut down this JBOD to conserve power. But if my iSCSI mounts are running off the SSDs, I want to try to keep the SSDs running as long as possible. So I probably want to put the spinning disks in the spot that's easier to shut down and keep the SSDs in the NAS, which is the actual computer and the thing that like hosts the storage. So that being said, the got you to which part of the system is internal and external means I would actually want an NVMe controller or basically the better controller card with internal ports that I can wire right up to the bays on the NAS itself.
Right. Which means we should probably go with the 9300 series with external ports for now? Or what are you thinking?
So the other thing could be if I do a 9400 internal card, we could go back. I was able to find one of these internal to external adapters while we were talking. I could go with one of these, and I could turn the internal card that I already have into an external card with an extra set of 2 cables in this. And that's one option. And then I can do a 9400 internal card, and that can run to the existing backplane that I've got. In fact, if I don't do that, I'm stuck buying 2 cards at some point, aren't I? Because then I'm doing an external 9300 right now, and then an internal 9400 at some point. And then I've got an extra controller card floating around, which, I mean, may not be bad for a spare, but if I've already got 2 in the unit, I probably don't need a physical spare card. I can just jumper, like I said before, I can just jumper my drives or my backplanes around until I'm able to order a new controller card as a replacement if it dies.
Well, this route, the route of getting the 94008i instead of external, would mean that it's the first option that you talked about, that you also get that other adapter PCI thing for, what was it, $50? And
$25 with free shipping. I am not opposed to an adapter. Yeah. I mean, I guess I need the cables to go with it, but
I think the cable. Yeah, exactly. Like I think this route is probably the cheapest, and at the end of the day, you won't have a third HBA card laying around that you probably won't be using for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of sounds like a nice option. I'm not opposed to this in any way. So maybe I should take a quick look here for internal versions of this card. And that's even cheaper.
Yeah, internal could definitely be cheaper.
So yeah, tri-mode SAS SATA NVMe, updated SAS 3. And so I guess the other catch to this too is if I get one of these controllers that supports NVMe, my current back planes do not support NVMe.
No.
But in theory, I can pull the back plane and upgrade it to support it. In theory, yeah. And if I can't do that, then I can run the 9400 external and get a dedicated JBOD that will support NVMe.
Ding,
So
ding, ding.
that's an option.
Yeah.
Okay. So the flexibility of an internal 9400 with an internal to external adapter here sounds like a pretty good deal. I guess the other thing, if I wanted to nitpick, is I could say like this restricts airflow more, but for how small it is, I don't think I actually care in practice. I have a feeling it's not going to affect anything in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what type of card do I need that? Like, what's why is this one $300 and this one is, oh, this is refurb and this is brand new. Okay.
Brand new for close to 300. That's a pretty good price.
And let's just see what this one. This one I don't.
For those in the audience that might be asking, why aren't we going with a 16i or E variant? That's because these cards are found in 8X PCI form factor, and we haven't seen one, or one doesn't exist in X16. So we'll be limited by the PCI bandwidth if we do go with the with 8 ports. Essentially, we won't be able to utilize the full bandwidth or the full speed of the array if we have 4 ports going through the small pipe of 8X PCIe.
That's a great point. So yeah, even though that I might end up putting this into a 16X slot, that's why it's not worth upgrading the card I have right now with 2 ports to a 4-port card. Two cards running in 2 different ports, 2 different PCI slots is theoretically going to perform faster because we get the full bandwidth out of those 2 ports. Yeah, so I guess at this point it's all right. So we basically got a.
I'm not seeing a whole lot of options.
Card pick. Yeah, there's really not, is there?
Oh, by UnixSurplus, 325. Oh wait, is that external?
I didn't see.
Yeah, that's external. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, where was it? I don't even see it on the page.
Mine is showing me results matching fewer words. So it's probably just searching for 9400.
Oh, gotcha.
There's a magical card in the wild that has like a bazillion HBA ports. It's Rocket something. I don't remember the name, but it's cray-cray.
Huh.
Sorry, a bazillion mini SAS ports. I said HBA ports.
So I guess long story short here, there's a couple of these cards. And actually, here's a 16i to show an example of what we were just talking about. So this has 4 SAS ports on it here. But the PCI slot on it is only 8X. So if you add up the 12 gigabits per second per channel, there is more bandwidth on the SAS ports than you can actually fit down the PCI pipe. So that's the deal with that. So I get all the physical connections that I would want off this card, but it's it's probably going to perform worse than going with the 2 cards.
Yeah, and it might fare well if you're doing like 4 physical ports and you're just doing the breakout strategy where you're just using those breakout mini SAS cables to 4 SATA cables. That'll give you 16 SATA devices that you'll be able to connect to this one card. Which I think under that application, it would be fine, but it's not the application that we're going for today.
Right. So looks like I'll basically have to just pick one of these cards.
Yeah, I'm wondering what's up with the refurbished one. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, we'll take a quick look. I might be able to do some of this picking here offline. This looks like a general note and doesn't really say what's going on with the refurb. But basically, like something in this price range and this model number, like that's looking pretty good. So I'll actually just save that over in my wish list here, just to make sure I've got it. So I've got that. I've got a card. I've got an adapter that can go internal, external. What else am I missing now? Because it seems like I'm going to need some cables to wire this stuff up at a minimum.
Yep. Go over to UnixSurplus store and just search for mini SAS HD cables.
You know, I've never had to. Oh, do you mean their actual website, or you mean on eBay?
On eBay, like you could click if you drill down on one of the items, on one of you'll be able to click on their store, and then that'll give you an option to under items for sale. There's the number count to the right.
This page. This shows you how much I've done this.
Yeah, I think so. Now
let's just go ahead and save that seller while I'm. Oh, right, can't do it from here.
There's a way to search for just stuff under a particular, maybe. Yeah, search all 2,469 items.
Gotcha.
Now just type in mini SAS HD. And let's see what kind of cables they got. There's 2 variants. One where it's just one strand of cable, and then there's another variant where it's like 2 cables coming out of the connector itself. I have both variants. Both work fine. It's just your preference at that point.
Gotcha. Let's see if I can.
I think that one might be the 2.
Yeah, 2
strand.
cables bundled together. All right. And then the other type. Nope, that's still 2 cables. Maybe this. That looks like a single cable. Let's see. Is there a price difference between the 2? Because I'm guessing there is. This is $20 for 5 feet versus. Okay, so this is not an apples to apples comparison. So this one's probably more expensive because it's twice as long. But that being said, I would probably prefer to keep it in one cable because I'm doing decent cable management in the rack, and this is probably going to make it easier to loom those cables in. I've done enough cable management in my day that I could probably make this work, but it feels like it's going to be less graceful and more of a pain for me to have to try to manage this. Whereas I'm staring at this from a cable management perspective going, yeah, I can loop this in, no problem. and it's gonna play nicely with other cables that are loomed in the rack there too.
Could be, yes. And then we're also going to, aside from an external cable, which you'll need to connect from the adapter, the internal to external adapter to your actual JBOD, we'll need an internal variant of this cable.
Yeah, and so the other part while I'm staring at it here is I probably want like 5 or 6 feet.
Yeah.
Even though, and so what I'm thinking is these units are, they're next to each other right now. So the JBOD is directly below the NAS. So like the least amount of cable I could probably do comfortably is probably 3 feet. Because even if and actually thinking about this, I don't actually have to go from one side of one unit to the other side of the other, but that would be really comfortable with 3 feet. I'm probably going to be able to loop them directly to each other. So like probably I could even get away with like 1.5 cables.
There's a 4.9 feet, 1.5 meter, that first option, but I don't know if that's the double.
That was the double. That was the first one I clicked. I guess if I had to go with this, I could go with it. I'm just hoping for the other type.
Yeah.
What I was getting at there is when the units are in the rack, like with a 1.5 foot, with a 1 or 1.5 foot jumper, yes, it seems like it will be cleaner when those units are wired together, but I'm going to have to unplug it every time I need to pull one of those units out. And I might not want to do that because I might want to be able to pull a unit out of the rack, or at least like slide it out on its rails while it's still running. And so if I've got small jumpers, it's going to prevent me from keeping that, that unit online while I pull it.
I would take that into account because I personally like to slide them out. And I do that when I'm either hot swapping or installing new drives in the JBOD. Like I just pull it out while it's on, pop the hood and install the new drives. And I have enough slack in the mini SAS HD cables to do so.
Yeah, so it feels like 3 feet is probably going to be pretty comfortable because I know I now know in my head these are going to daisy chain on the same side. If we can only find these in like 6 feet, I have enough space for cable management in my rack that I could manage that cable somewhere and keep it pretty tidy. So I'd be okay with that if we can only find like a 6-footer, or like this, like I could hide 10 feet of cable if I needed to.
Mm-hmm.
I would prefer less though, because 10's going to get harder to work with these units being so close together.
And these cables are thick, so I wish I had one nearby. I have a few, but I don't know where they're at.
I just start unplugging your JBOD, it'll be fine. So I'll take a look for some of those cables then. Let me just jot down like this one, just so I have it handy here.
Mm-hmm.
So then we need to find the internal cabling.
Yeah.
And was that on? No, we searched for. Yeah, it might show up in this list, right?
Might. Scroll down a bit.
And so I think you touched on this a little bit, like, why don't I just buy more of these and then wire them up between my my backplane and the card internally?
So the external cables are obviously going to be shielded and just meant for external applications. Internal, you won't see that much. If you go back to the previous view, that one right there, 20. Yeah, that'll be a good example. The one next to it was also one. The internal ones will look very much like this, where they just have like a braided sleeve And that's often what you'll find inside of the appliances. So I would say let's just stick with what the manufacturer intended to use internally versus externally. But you very well could. Like, nothing is stopping you. The only thing that is stopping you is the length, because you're probably not going to find an external mini SAS HC cable in the length that you want for internal applications. The other thing is the shielding and the thickness of the cable isn't going to allow you to tightly bend it if you need to bend it inside to do wire management. And the internal cables, since they don't have that thick shielding and any of that, you won't have that problem.
Mm-hmm. So like this one, for example, you can see has a pretty tight bend radius here, and you could loom that around a lot of places in the chassis.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those places in the chassis are not necessarily easy to get to or kind of crammed. So this helps you get around some of those spaces.
Yeah, it also does help a little bit with airflow also. It's less matter inside of the chassis taking up space. So airflow will just be a pinch better. It's negligible, but still.
Right. And whereas the external cable like this, there's no way that it's going to bend that tightly. And if you do, you're probably going to end up breaking the cable if you do that. The other thing here too is this is a 5-foot cable, but $20 for a 5-foot cable, and I'm guessing the price on this, wow, it's surprisingly not cheaper. I thought the internals were going to be cheaper.
Yeah.
Although I guess also this is 2 of them for $30.
And these are different.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it is a pair. I see. Yeah. They are actually, if you do the math, they are cheaper.
Yeah, $15 instead of $40 would. Yeah, but there's $20 for one, so the other one is a pair of 2. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got that then. So the system is starting to look. Let's see. Maybe I draw it on the screen or something. Maybe I shouldn't draw it on the screen. Hang on a second. Let's go over to. Here we go. The NAS. All right. Can I? Let me scroll on that one. I guess we'll maybe do it from the back. Let's try that. So I have a 16X card slot here. And so we'll say maybe the controller is going in here. Internal controller card, which will let me pick the channels from whichever one I want to go with. We'll put the internal to external adapter, say, down here. And so that'll actually have the 2 physical ports, SAS ports, there. So internally, we'll have those 2 cables run. So like the board is going to go, down in the computer there, and then it's going to have the ports coming off the back. So we'll take both of those ports to here with that internal cable. And then I've got the JBOD below this, and it's got a card over here on the side with those ports in it. And
people.
What's that?
Drawn to scale, people.
I still couldn't hear you.
I said it's drawn to scale.
Oh yes, totally to scale. This fits 12 bays in there. So we use the external cables to get to there, and in reality, what that would probably look like, they won't go straight there. They'll get loomed up in the back of the rack, and I'll do some cable management there, and then they'll connect up here. So then loop and cable management in there. And that way, I've got a service loop back here, and I can undo, like basically I coil those up with Velcro or something like that on the cables. So if I need to slide one of these units out of the rack, I can undo the Velcro. So I've got a slack on the cables, and then I can pull one of the units out. And that way they still stay connected, they can still stay running, but I can get inside the case if I need to do some work or mess with something in there that is safe to do while the unit's still running. So obviously, like, you're not going to want to pull PCI cards while you're doing that. But actually, one good example is like if you just want to blow the dust out of the case. You know, getting some of that compressed air or stuff like that just to do like regular maintenance. You might not want to have to power off the whole server to do that. And so just to blow the dust out is a really great thing where you can pull the running system out of the rack, pull the case off, just blow down the inside of it, and then you can put it all back together without having to shut everything off. And you know, especially if you have multiple users on your network, or you just don't want that downtime, you know, or you've got like a server that's doing stuff, like if it's hosting a web server or some application that you've got going in your home lab, that won't have to suffer downtime if you just want to, you know, make sure your systems stay clean and stuff like that.
This is looking good. It's taking shape.
Yeah, man, thanks for this. Now it looks like I've got a handful of money to spend here, but thanks to eBay, it looks like not too much money. This looks like a pretty affordable project for what it is. And yeah, and this is cool. And I think we've also got some options where I'm guessing off the top of my head, it's looking like this project is going to come in at $300 to $500 based off of just kind of what we've looked at here. But it seems like if someone wanted to do something similar for even cheaper, it sounds like you can kind of get away with possibly maybe like that $150 to $200 price range if you're going for like the 9300 controller. Maybe if you aren't doing the external breakout card and stuff like that, if you just do controller cards straight to another system, or if you're daisy chaining your off of your backplane that you already have. Let me just clear those annotations real quick. So like I have the backplane up here that has output ports in it. And if we'll just say I had the JBOD down here because that's horrible. If someone ever sends you a chassis that dinged up, send that back. Yeah, somebody dropped that first drawing on the ground there. You could get that $25 internal to external card like we found there, and you could daisy chain off the existing backplane to that card and then go from there to your JBOD. And now you're doing that for the cost of an internal cable, which we just found was like $30. The cost of this internal to external card, which is another $25, and then the cost of the external cables, which looks like maybe $40 on the higher end, but it seems like maybe if we find them in a shorter length, it might cut down a couple bucks there as well. So, I mean, I guess that project, if you've got an existing controller and you want to add more storage, like in a JBOD, to an existing system that happens to have an output, SAS outputs on that backplane. I think if I've done the math right off the top of my head, this project is potentially under $100, assuming you already have a JBOD and a NAS, and you just need to add the connectivity. All right, so we just had to start this back up because when we were having a little sidebar here, Abelino didn't know this existed, and this changes everything. So what we've got here is a converter card for basically a SAS drive bay on this side, and an NVMe, like consumer NVMe you can put on this side if you wanted to, into the M.2 slot. So if we were looking at something like, just say one of the Samsung 980s or something like that, you can now put one of these into a NAS by doing that. And that was one of my whole thoughts for going NVMe. So Abelino, how interesting does this look now for throwing NVMe drives in a home lab NAS?
That is amazing. It does change everything because the enterprise or data center quality NVMe SSD form factor, so 3.5-inch form factor, are really expensive. They're like in the thousands plus range, as you can see here. And that's only 1.6 terabytes. Sure, tolerances are much better and throughputs are probably gonna be better. but you can't compare when you're going to plop in a drive at, how much was the 980 Pro? Like $400?
2 terabytes for 280.
$280 for 2 terabytes. Boy.
And these are also the pros. They make a less expensive but still good version of this, which I think are like what, the 970s or 960s or something. I don't remember the number, but there's one that's not the pro that's still pretty decent.
Yeah, and look at these speeds: 7,000 read and 5,100 write megabytes per second. Right. This makes it really affordable to create a storage cluster based on NVMe technology using an NVMe adapter. So essentially an NVMe to NVMe SSD form factor adapter, which is what we're seeing here. So affordable and doable. We got to test this out. This is amazing.
Glad I got you excited about this. I for some reason I thought you already knew this was a thing. This is exactly what I had my eye on, because like those SSDs and basically with SATA, like you're capping out at like 500 megabytes per second here, and if you can get this to NVMe's, like you're in crazy speeds here.
Yeah. And as we saw from earlier, those HBA cards, the 9400 series supports up to upwards in the 30s of NVMe's. One thing that we will need to figure out is how many PCI slots a single one of these take. How many NVMe slots some of these take, because the allocation is weird. Like it's not 1-to-1. For example, that
right, because like this might take up a certain amount of PCI lanes just for this one.
Just for that one. Mm-hmm. Which means in theory, it's only you're not going to be able to put in the entire 30 NVMe drives, but it's more like divided by a factor, and it's like 10 or 12. But still, 10 or 12 of these bad boys in a 2U, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's still like a measly 50,000 megabytes per second or something like that at that point, right? So, yeah.
And upgrade that network now. Yeah,
I know. And so the other point to think about that came up offline as well was that Supermicro motherboard and its infrastructure essentially has PCI 3.0 slots. So those are limited. I can't remember what the bandwidth is off the top of my head, but 3.0 is definitely not as fast as PCIe PCIe 4.0 is. Mm-hmm. So that's another question here is with PCI 3.0 with an 8x PCI slot, is that actually going to impact, or like how much is that going to impact that speed performance on the NVMe's? I think the short answer to that, so like obviously there's a bunch of math and theory behind it, but I think the short answer to that is going to be, in practice, it's still a lot faster than having SATA SSDs. But yeah, this will be an interesting thing. I'm wondering if I should or can feasibly experiment with this anytime soon. But this is an interesting. Actually, Abelino, you do it. I'd much rather spend your money at this point.
If I wasn't using the 4 NVMe SSDs that I already have in 2 systems, I would definitely pull them out to try this out. But they're in use.
I mean, it sounds worth it. So yeah, this is what we were up to. This is one of those crazy ideas I had in my head, and thought that was probably worth hopping back on and sharing here. That being said, this looks like a great place to wrap up this episode. And yeah, thanks a lot for your help, Abelino. And I guess I've got more full stack engineering to do at this point.
Yeah, nice weekend project.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you next time.